This is a matrix that I actually developed for some of the confusion that was happening both here in Britain and in the States around the relationship between all the various approaches to employment, including the touchiest one, the relationship between traditional, what we in the States refer to as competitive supported employment, and this new upstart of customized. And it turns out they're really not competitors at all. They're concepts that augment each other. So the matrix starts in the top left with how most people in both of our societies acquire their jobs. And that is that we go in on the left-hand column competitively. In other words, we're competing against the demands of the employer and against other job seekers who would like the job. So, you know, we might be fully qualified for the position, but wait, there's 4 people over there and they look even more qualified than I do. So there's at least 2 levels of competition on any competitive job. And once we get that job, the way we're supported is what we would refer to as naturally. In other words, we're going to do our job in the way that any other employee would get support. We're going to learn our job in the way other employees learn their job. We're going to be supported and supervised in similar ways. So the top left quadrant is competitive and it's natural. And it's the way that that most of our workforce systems in each of our countries, if your Ministry of Labor, our Department of Labor, I think we both have places in communities where people go to get job assistance for new jobs. This is the way it works for most of the people in our society. In the States, we have a vocational rehabilitation entity that brings this to people with disabilities. And there are plenty of people with disabilities who are able to do competitive work with the natural supports available in the workplace. And this would include both your disability rights law and ours in the States, that if you happen to have a disability, you would get access to whatever a reasonable adjustment or reasonable accommodation was to be offered. But that's the top left. As we go to the bottom left, in the mid-'80s, the so-called disability movement across the world began understanding that we needed to bring additional supports, and this is exactly what Steve Baer was talking about this morning in his kind of historical reflection of quality supported employment. We needed to bring an array of quality supports to assist people to be competitive, to meet demand. And he talked about fitting people, understanding who people were, making sure it wasn't just some first job, any job concept, but really good supported employment was very thoughtful, very supportive, includes good training and good matching, and it's been a great idea for both of our countries and beyond us. For, you know, the civilized world has done well with good supported employment in country after country. And then along the way, we began to see the limits of support in relation to competition. And that's the way to think about the rationale for needing customization. Is there indeed a limitation of the best supports that you can bring, and all that that means, to the competitive standard? And I used to say, unfortunately, there is, but anymore, realistically, yes, there is. And at that point, it still should not mean that, okay, when we reach that point, then the rest of those people down below, they can't work. No, we cannot accept that. And I mean work for pay in the community in regular jobs. But the expectations have to be customized, and that brings in the lower right quadrant, that in addition to all the best support, the lower right quadrant brings in customizing the relationship, just exactly as I've talked about, so that in addition to the supports you get, the very relationship has now been customized.
And that's going to mean, and again, in Britain as in the States, a voluntarily negotiated coming together between employer and individual's representative to result in this customized job description. In which case, the lower right quadrant would be referred to as customized supported employment. And there will still be what you may not use these distinctions, but conceptually you need to understand. I'm not so much into language and jargon here as I am into what's going on in the workplace. If you have someone meeting an open job requirement, you are in competitive supported employment. Regardless whether you call it that, it is. But then when you negotiate the relationship, you've customized it. It obviously leaves the top right quadrant, which is an interesting quadrant for all of us to think about. And it basically says this: what if for any people with complex lives, or maybe just particularly strong-held notions about what work ought to look like? They've got all the skills in the world, but they're kind of peculiar about what they want in life. You know, it's, I don't want what they want, I want what I want, sort of thing. We can use the top right quadrant, and basically what it says is that we're going to customize the relationship with the employer, but could it be that there are people who would then not need job site supports or need them so much? Obviously there's a gray area. This matrix shows a fine line between whether you need supports and not, but actually we know it's much grayer than that. It's probably a large area, because there are people who might need some initial supports and then may not need so many. There are people who need supports episodically and not full-time, so we know that that's a gray area. And it's a very, very interesting area, and I wish Steve Baer was here. He had to leave. But one of the things that we need more research on is it so that if we customize the relationship, the need for ongoing support will be reduced? That's an excellent research hypothesis to make. And the early returns in the States, we had a pretty good research component to the early days of customized rolling out in 2001 to about 2007. So we had about 8 years of pretty good data. We're indicating exactly that. We're not trying to say that we want to remove supports from people, not give them the supports they need, but it's a huge value to our society that if by customizing we actually reduce the supports necessary. And here's another way of saying it, and those of you who are very knowledgeable about supported employment, I want you to think about it. You might agree with me. I think at times when we went for what we could call by this matrix competitive supported employment, the job coach was the shock absorber between the demands of the employer and the abilities of the job seeker. And sometimes that frankly got muddled, you know, and you had job coaches doing all sorts of things to make things work because the agreement was, here's the whole job demand. Oh gosh, I'm here, what do I do now? Because it's not a perfect match between, or not, it doesn't have to be perfection. It's not really a very good match between what the employer expects and what my person can deliver. So as job coaching, I've got some tough decisions to make. Dare I start co-working? Dare I start being a part of their productivity? And once I do, the slippery slope that creates, I'm never going to get out of here. And then some bureaucrat looks at that and says, I'm way too expensive. We can't have supported employment. It's costing too much. Well, I think there's some stuff in here that's very important. And again, this is, I hope you're hearing, this is not at all critical of supported employment. It is enhancing of supported employment, indeed, in a way that we get a chance to keep this great good idea alive. So think about this matrix.